I'm Henry Collins, 70 years old, a father, a widower, and for decades I lived for one man, my son. That night in Nashville, the air smelled of whiskey and fried steak. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, glasses clinking. But at my table, silence grew sharp. Michael, my only son, stood up. He looked at me the way a stranger looks at trash, and he shouted, loud enough for the whole room to freeze. "You're useless, Dad." The words hit harder than any bullet I'd faced in war. Forks stopped, chairs creaked, every eye turned. I felt my skin burn, my chest tighten, my heart breaking in front of strangers. The waiter walked over, no smile, no questions, just a folded bill placed by my hand, paid, in cash. I stared at it, confused, humiliated, but something inside me shifted. For years, I had given Michael everything, my savings, my labor, my silence, and this was my reward, public shame. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even speak, because in that moment, revenge was born, quiet, cold, patient. And if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, by blood, by family, stay with me. Subscribe so you don't miss the truth that came after. This isn't just a story of humiliation. This is the night a father stopped being a victim and became the man his son never saw coming. My name is Henry Collins, 70 years old, born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I wasn't born rich, I wasn't born lucky, but I was born stubborn. When I was 19, I joined the Marines. I fought, I bled, I survived. And when I came home, I promised myself one thing: to build a life worth fighting for. I married young, the love of my life, Margaret. She was the kind of woman who made a broken down house feel like heaven. Together, we dreamed of a family. We only had one child, a boy, Michael. When Margaret passed away too soon, everything changed. I wasn't just a father. I became both father and mother, provider, protector, teacher. I worked with my hands, engines, tires, grease under my nails, long days at the garage, late nights fixing neighbors' cars just to make enough. But I never complained, because when I saw Michael smile, I believed it was worth it. Every dollar I saved for him. Every hour I lived for him. He was my reason, my purpose, my blood. I thought raising him would be my proudest victory. I thought love would be enough. I was wrong. Michael was everything I had left, and I made sure he never forgot it. When other boys had shiny bikes, Michael had me. I built his first bicycle from scrap metal and spare parts at the garage. It wobbled down the street, but he laughed like it was gold. I taught him how to throw a baseball in the backyard, how to catch fireflies on hot Tennessee nights, how to pray before bed, even when dinner was just beans and cornbread. I remember his little hands on the steering wheel of my old Chevy truck, feet too short to reach the pedals, eyes wide, pretending he was driving us to someplace better. He looked at me and said, "One day, Dad, I'll buy you a new one." That memory carried me through the hardest nights, when my body ached from work, when bills stacked higher than I could pay. I believed in his promise. I wasn't raising a boy. I was raising a future, a man who would honor the sacrifices behind him. Neighbors said, "Henry, you spoil that kid." But I didn't care, because spoiling him meant giving him the childhood I never had. And back then, he looked at me like I was his hero, not useless, not a burden, his hero. I held on to that look. I never imagined it would vanish. Time changes people, and success, it changes them faster. Michael grew up, graduated top of his class, got into real estate in Nashville when the city was booming. I was proud enough to tell every neighbor at the diner, "That's my boy." But with each deal he closed, something inside him shifted. He stopped riding in my old Chevy truck. He bought a black Mercedes, stopped eating cornbread with me on Sunday nights, started dining with men in suits, drinking wine I couldn't even pronounce. At first I thought it was just ambition, a young man trying to find his place, but slowly I saw it. The look in his eyes when he glanced at me, Not pride, not love, embarrassment. One night, I showed up at his new condo carrying a toolbox, a leaky sink, I thought. Just a chance to help. He opened the door, looked past me, and said, "Dad, I've got people for that now." It cut deeper than any wound I'd taken in war, because this wasn't just distance, it was rejection. The boy who once promised me a new truck now parked mine around the corner so his neighbors wouldn't see. That's when I realized the bond we built in sweat and sacrifice was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. It happened on a Friday night. Michael called and said, "Let's have dinner, Dad. My treat." For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe this was his way of reaching back. The restaurant was in downtown Nashville. Crystal lights, white tablecloths, a place where the cheapest steak cost more than my week's groceries. I sat across from him, wearing my best jacket, the same jacket Margaret once patched with her own hands. I thought he'd notice. He didn't. Michael scrolled on his phone, barely looking at me. I asked about his work, his health, his life. He answered with one word, then went silent again. And then he stood up, glass of wine in hand, eyes scanning the room, and in a voice that carried across every table, he said, "This is my father. He's useless now. Can't even keep up with the world." The room froze. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died. Dozens of strangers stared at me like I was some broken relic. My chest tightened. My ears rang. I wanted to disappear. Before I could move, a waiter approached. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just placed the bill in front of me. Paid. In cash. Michael laughed, lifted his glass, and sat down as if nothing happened. But something inside me shattered, and something else woke up. I left the table. Not a word. Not a glance back at Michael. The restroom was empty. Bright lights, cold tiles, the hum of a broken fan. I gripped the sink, staring at the man in the mirror. Wrinkled skin, calloused hands, eyes tired from years of sacrifice. And behind all that, shame, the kind that burns from the inside. I heard Margaret's voice in my head, her last words before she passed. "Promise me, Henry, never give up on our boy." I had kept that promise, through hunger, through debt, through every long night alone. And now, my boy had turned me into a punchline. I pressed my palms against the sink, harder and harder. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to punch through the glass. But all I did was breathe. 1, 2, 3. I whispered to myself, "You raised him. You made him. You can unmake this shame." Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall, because tears wouldn't change him, and tears wouldn't change me. That night, in that cold restroom, a decision formed. Not out of anger, not out of hate, but out of something colder. Revenge. I stepped out of the restroom, face washed, mask fixed. Michael was gone, left without a word. But someone was still there. The waiter. Tall, broad shoulders under a worn uniform. Eyes that didn't look at me like I was trash. Eyes that recognized me. He slid a folded slip into my hand. No words, just a nod. Then he walked away, tray balanced, vanishing into the noise. I opened it later, outside under the Nashville streetlights. It was the bill, paid in cash, signed at the bottom, Semper Fi. My chest tightened. It had been decades since I'd heard those words. Always faithful. The code of Marines. My code. I looked around, searching for him, but he was gone. All that remained was the smell of fried steak, the echo of laughter I no longer heard. I knew then it wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was a signal. Some battles aren't fought with fists. Some are fought with silence, timing, and proof. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this war after all. A week later, Michael called. No apology, no hesitation, just, "Dad, I need you to sign something." I drove my old Chevy to his office downtown. Glass towers, valet parking, a world that didn't feel like mine. Inside, the place reeked of money. Mahogany desks, leather chairs, walls lined with framed deals. Michael barely looked up when I walked in. He shoved a folder across the desk. Property transfer, he said. Just sign. Don't worry about the details. You wouldn't understand. The words stung sharper than any insult, but I stayed silent. I flipped through the pages. Land deeds. My land. The little property I'd worked decades to pay off. I looked at him, waiting for some trace of respect. There was none. Only impatience. Dad, seriously, it's just paperwork. Don't make this harder than it has to be. My hand shook, but not from age. From rage. The kind that simmers deep, waiting. I signed. Carefully, slowly, letting the pen linger just enough to leave an impression. He smiled like he'd won a battle. But what he didn't know, I'd kept a copy. And I'd left my fingerprints on every page. As I walked out of that office, past the glass and marble, I didn't feel defeated. I felt ready. Because sometimes surrender is just the first step in war. I left Michael's office with the folder pressed against my chest. To him, I was just an old man who signed away his last piece of worth. To me, it was the first brick in a wall he'd never climb. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in East Nashville, the same table where Margaret once served cornbread and sweet tea. I spread the papers out one by one. Every page smelled of fresh ink and arrogance. I took photos, made copies, slipped the originals back into the folder, neat and untouched, because Michael believed I was too old to think ahead. The next morning, he called again, his voice smooth, casual. Thanks, Dad. You did the right thing. You're making this easier for both of us. I played my part. Soft chuckle, slow words. You're welcome, son. Anything for you. Silence on the line. Then laughter. Not the kind I remembered from his childhood, but sharp, cruel. The kind of laughter that said, I own you. I hung up the phone. My heart was steady, my face calm, because letting him believe he'd won was the sweetest weapon I had. The louder he celebrated, the deeper I buried my silence. And in that silence, a plan grew. Every night after work, I drove my old Chevy down Gallatin Pike, past neon lights, past liquor stores and pawn shops, until I reached the diner I'd been going to for 40 years. Booths cracked from use, coffee always lukewarm, but it was steady, like me. I ordered the same thing every night, black coffee and apple pie. The waitress didn't ask any more. She just brought it with a nod. And then I opened my notebook. Not a diary, a record. Every word Michael said to me. Every paper he asked me to sign. Dates, times, witnesses. I wrote slow, careful, like a soldier cleaning his rifle. Because these weren't just words. They were ammunition. Some nights, I wasn't alone. At the counter, the same waiter from the night sat quietly, drinking water. Never spoke, never stared. But when he left, he always tapped the counter twice. A signal, Marine to Marine. I wasn't forgotten. I kept my head low. I smiled when Michael called. I played the fool. But at that diner, pen scratching on paper, I became something else. Not useless, not weak, but patient. And patience is the deadliest weapon I know. 2 months later, Michael invited me to a company gala. A towering hotel ballroom in downtown Nashville. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in black vests, tables filled with men in tailored suits and women in silk dresses. I wore the same patched jacket, the one Margaret once mended, not because I didn't own another, but because it reminded me who I was. Michael took the stage. Spotlights hit his face. He raised a glass of champagne, smile wide. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I built this company from the ground up. No handouts, no shortcuts. Just hard work and vision. The crowd clapped, applauded like he was a self-made king. I sat in the back, hands folded. Every word he spoke cut deeper, because I knew the truth. Every dollar, every brick, every contract was built on the blood and sweat I poured into his future. He looked right at me when he said it, like daring me to stand, to shout, to break. But I didn't. I let him shine in his lie. Because sometimes you let a man climb higher, so the fall breaks harder. When the applause faded, I whispered to myself, "Your stage, son, but soon it'll be mine." The applause still echoed when I rose from my chair, slow, steady. Every eye in that ballroom turned. Michael's smile faltered. "Dad, sit down," he hissed, the microphone still in his hand. But I didn't. I walked to the stage, boots clicking against polished marble floors, the patched jacket heavy on my shoulders. I took the microphone from him, firm but calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "my son speaks of building from nothing, but let me tell you what nothing really looks like." I held up the folder I carried. Old papers, deeds, contracts, signatures. His empire's skeleton. This land," I said, voice steady, "was mine. Bought with 30 years of grease, sweat, and overtime. Transferred under pressure." Gasps filled the room. Michael lunged forward, but I raised my hand. Not to stop him, but to silence him. "These documents show who paid, who sacrificed, and it wasn't him." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The board members leaned in, eyes sharp. I could feel the weight shift, the tide turning. I looked at my son. His face red, jaw clenched, eyes darting. For the first time, he wasn't in control. And for the first time, I was. The room buzzed with whispers. Michael grabbed the mic back, his voice sharp. "He's old, confused. Don't listen to him." But a man from the board rose slowly, silver hair, stern eyes. He held a folder of his own. "Mr. Collins," he said, looking at me, "your father isn't the one confused. We've reviewed financial records, and your company's accounts don't add up." The room stilled again. Michael's face drained of color. The man opened the folder, pages rustling like thunder. Large withdrawals, transfers to personal accounts, funds that should have gone to projects, gone instead to cover gambling debts, and names forged on contracts, including your father's. Gasps broke out. One woman at the table covered her mouth. Another shook her head in disbelief. Michael stumbled, words tumbling out. "They don't know what they're talking about. Dad signed those papers willingly." I stepped closer, calm. "No, son, I signed once. The rest, you copied. You stole, you lied." The boardroom silence turned heavy. Not judgment yet, but the weight of truth pressing down. Michael's hand shook. Sweat beaded his forehead. The mask he wore for years cracked wide open, and in that moment, the man who once laughed at me in front of strangers stood exposed as nothing more than a fraud. Just when the room seemed ready to explode, another voice cut through. Deep, steady, familiar. From the back of the ballroom, the waiter stepped forward. Not in uniform now, but in a dark suit. Clean, sharp, eyes locked on Michael. "Name Sergeant Tom Walker," he said. "United States Marine Corps, retired. Served under Henry Collins in 72. The crowd turned. Michael froze. Tom held up a small folder. "I've been watching, keeping records, because betrayal doesn't just wound families. It dishonors the men who bled for your freedom." He laid down copies of bank slips, photographs, signed receipts, every piece tied back to Michael. The board gasped again. One man muttered, "He forged military funds." Michael stammered, face pale. "That's not true. He's nobody." But Tom's voice thundered, "Nobody? Your father saved my life in Da Nang. I owe him mine. So when I saw what you did, using his name, stealing from veterans' accounts, I made sure the truth wouldn't die in silence." The documents landed on the table like a gavel. Final, absolute. Michael's legs buckled. He sank into a chair, sweat dripping, mouth open but empty of words. And as the room erupted in outrage, I stood still, calm, silent, because revenge had already spoken for me. The ballroom erupted. Voices clashed, cameras flashed. Michael buried his face in his hands. But I didn't stay to watch him fall. I slipped out quietly, through the back door into the cool Nashville night. The air smelled of rain and asphalt. I breathed it in, steady and slow. My old Chevy waited by the curb, the same truck Michael once promised to replace. I drove, not fast, not slow, just steady. And soon I found myself back where I always belonged. The diner, same neon sign buzzing, same booth in the corner, same chip mug of black coffee. I sat down, jacket heavy on my shoulders, hands wrapped around the cup. For a long while, I said nothing, because revenge doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence. The waitress refilled my cup, asked if I wanted pie. I shook my head. Tonight wasn't about sweetness. It was about something colder. I stared out the window, rain streaking down the glass, and I thought of Margaret, the promise I had kept, the boy we had raised, and the man he had become. Revenge doesn't heal the pain, I whispered, but sometimes it stops it from spreading. I lifted the cup, drank deep, and let the night swallow the rest. I sat there in the diner, the rain tapping against the glass, the coffee gone cold in my hands. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not happy, not healed, but free. I looked around, couples eating in silence, truckers staring at their plates, lonely souls hunched over their coffee like it was the only thing keeping them alive. And I realized betrayal isn't rare. It wears many faces: a son, a husband, a friend. It cuts the same way, no matter who holds the knife. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever been humiliated by someone you raised? By someone you loved with everything you had? What did you do? What would you have done if you were me? Leave your story below, because sometimes speaking it out loud is the first step to taking your power back. And if you've carried that silence the way I carried mine, know this: you're not alone. There are others who've been cut just as deep, others who found their justice, cold and quiet. If this story spoke to you, stay. Subscribe. Not for me, but for yourself. For the stories that remind us that pain doesn't have to end in weakness. It can end in strength. It can end in justice. Because betrayal breaks us, but revenge teaches us we can rise again.